Today, we're going to be talking about membership, digging into the ways that various existing libraries of things are charging and not charging for memberships, what benefits and privileges are offered, and issues around access and accessibility. Access to libraries of things and spaces, but also accessibility to be able to get to and utilize the items that the libraries of things have. We've got a great set of presenters today, including Tim Willison from the Toronto Tool Library and Toronto Tool Library Maker.
I'm the executive director currently at the Toronto Tool Library, as well as the TTL Makerspace. And so kicking it off in terms of membership, yeah, we have a tiered membership system currently. It wasn't always like that. Up until 2017, it was a single tier with a really simple pricing structure. Currently, we have three tiers. So we have the basic, which is 55 Canadian dollars per year. That gives people 3-day borrowing terms with some borrowing fees that could be anywhere from $2 to $10. They're mostly on items that have a battery or have a really high maintenance involved with them. We have the twice fund, which is 85 for the year. That gives you the 7 days borrowing and has the exact same fee, borrowing fee structure as the basic. And then we have the high five, which is 110 for the year, actually gives 14 days of borrowing and has no fees associated with it, except for late fees, of course. Those apply across the board. And then in terms of other benefits that apply to all the membership tiers, there's no item limits. We have a few different monthly workshops, like a tool basics and sewing workshop and so forth, that are educational in nature and very hands-on. We have a fair amount of project mentoring. People will come in and describe what their project is, like they're trying to, fix their kitchen or something like that. And we'll give them lots of advice on how they could approach it, what tools they would use. And we have a fairly good library of educational materials that we've made that everybody gets access to. Now, all of this said, I don't think our structure's that good. It needs work. And I can talk a little bit in the next slide about changes that occurred over time. So the Toronto Tool Library in late 2017 engaged in a fairly large campaign to save the Toronto Tool Library. Had run into a number of different financial difficulties and problems, and so needed basically to raise funds. Now, I think that the change to the tiered system was basically in response to that financial need and trying to figure out some way that would work better than the simple system. Now, the campaign was successful. Before too long, the similar problems started to occur again. I got involved in late 2018 and became the executive director early 2019. And so started working on the problem. So the change to the tiered system, I think there were a few problems generated by that. The first was that it was somewhat confusing for people. It was very simple messaging prior to that, and explaining the different tiers and the conditions of the different tiers is a little bit harder to manage for staff and a little bit harder to digest for people who are coming to the tool library. But the big problem was that it vastly increased the costs in terms of storage, especially the top tier with the high five and the 14-day borrowing. If you think about it, 4 to 5 basic members could use a tool during the same time that a high five member will have it. And so this then means you need to stock a lot more inventory, which means you need a lot more space. You have a lot more repair parts and brands and trim levels and so forth that you have to support. And personally, I think probably the real unexpected problem is that it sort of took us in a different direction from the mission. Because if you think about it, uh, with no fees at the highest tier, it sort of ends up that people who have more money and can afford to the more expensive tier are sort of being subsidized by people who have less money and pay those borrowing fees. Certainly this is not an intentional effect, but it became apparent afterwards. And then we also have noted many times that people who have those very long borrowing terms are much more likely to procrastinate and bring the tool back having not actually used it. Because human nature, I've taught in college, people who, if they have a long time to write a paper, they wait until a couple of days before. It's the same thing with tools. Those were kind of big lessons learned. In terms of advice we could give, keeping good data is probably the number one thing. Reviewing inventory and being aware of the hard costs associated with the different inventory. That can include removing items that are very rarely borrowed or perhaps never borrowed. Here in Toronto, it's famously the most expensive city in Canada. And we're in the most dense urban area of the most expensive city, so space is at a premium. Planning for the effects of inflation. So I think the reason we ended up with a tier system was because we didn't have logical, like small increases rated against inflation. And so costs kept going up until, it kind of caught the whole organization by surprise. We're actually in some trouble. Putting some of what you make back into tangible improvements and being good at communicating those to the members so that they know those things are available is really important. You probably want to have a plan for some level of staffing after the initial years of operation, and avoiding like complicated, difficult to understand membership systems, and then planning for and communicating about the evolution of the organization over time. Probably what you are doing in year one and year two may become less effective in year 4, 5, and beyond. And so planning so that no one gets left behind or wonders what's going on as changes happen is pretty important.
You talked about that you moved to the tiered system. Can you go in a little bit more detail? Like how how are you planning on changing moving forward? What are you going to do in Toronto?
So we're definitely going to move away from the tiered system. We started talking about that more than 2 years ago, just to get people used to the idea. The problem is that once you give something to people, it is very difficult to remove it. They get used to it. And so what we've been doing is building up our other organization in the makerspace until it would reach a point that, in order to roll back some of the changes, it would not be an ending event for the tool library if we had a sudden loss of membership or dip in membership. Now, that may be overly cautious. I think the satisfaction levels are very high among the members. And in the downtown area, as I say, it's not easy running something like this. So it's a well-loved feature, but just to be on the safe side, we've been building up our makerspace so that we would be able to absorb any temporary losses that we might have as we transition away from tiers, and especially as we remove that 14-day borrowing that's been the biggest.
What percentage of your income do the membership dues cover? And then a follow-up from Francesca is what percentage of members are at that top tier?
So it's about, for the last question, it's about 55% of members are at the top tier. Memberships make up the bulk of the revenue, I would say, like around 80% of revenue comes from that. But this, again, is most likely due to the fact that we have 55% of our members that don't pay any borrowing fees. And that that really needs to be corrected so that it's more evenly distributed across all of the membership, I think.
Got it. And Claire asks, so these changes from the tiered system, in relation to it, did you predict that you would have to have more space or acquire more tools to cover the deficit? Or is that something that was foreseen?
It was rather unexpected, the effect that that would have. And I honestly, I would say, didn't fully reveal itself until the pandemic. During
Mhm,
the pandemic, we had to do a lot of reorganization, and we started, really calculating up like, well, what is the cost of the square footage that we're using compared to its utilization? I guess you would term it opportunity cost.
mhm.
And so we reorganized all of that during the pandemic with the goal that, when we come out of pandemic conditions, we'll have a short runway to get our momentum back again. I guess the positive side of it was we had time to think and organize and really plan our strategy there, and look at the overall effect of the tiered system.
And I've got another kind of, maybe it's a side question, but it's my memory that Toronto Tool Library there was 2 or 3 locations at one point in time. Is that right?
Yeah, there were three
Yeah.
locations. So there was one in Parkdale, one on St. Clair, and then where I am right now is at the Spadina location. So after 4 months of closures in the pandemic,
Mhm,
we had to close the St. Clair location. Then the Parkdale location, our space there actually got closed because of a mold problem. And so they had to do quite a bit of renovation work in there. So we basically took the Spadina location and rolled a lot of our resources into there, which I think ended up being a very good survival strategy during the pandemic. Most of our locations were open less than 20 hours a week, whereas here we're open every day, and the hours are a lot more convenient to folks. Now, we are benefiting from also being in the same location as the makerspace. So we have a lot of benefits of being able to kind of share resources between them. And some of the staffing is also shared between the two organizations. So those
mhm.
things kind of helped us to get through the tough time, and then have kind of helped us to thrive and succeed following that. We are much more stabilized now than we were in previous
Mhm.
years, and we don't really have a reliance on things like public funding and so forth.
Did members from those little locations transition to this singular location, or was there some shedding of members at that time?
The majority of them moved to the single location.
Okay.
The locations were not spread out that far.
Mhm.
It's about 15, 20 minutes between them. We we have about 80% of the membership that we had with three locations, we currently have with the single location.
Mm. Can you just touch back on real quick about the relationship between the makerspace and the tool library? Is there a
Mhm.
joint membership for those, or any other types of perks related to being a member of one or the other?
Well, they are completely separate. The
Okay.
Canadian government requires us to keep them quite separate because they have different organizational incorporations.
Mhm.
The Tool Library is a nonprofit. The Makerspace is a registered charity. So they are required to be quite separate. Now, I will say a lot of people do end up getting memberships with both because they are very symbiotic relationship there.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people working in the makerspace will get a tool library membership to take some
Mhm.
things home to finish up projects. A lot of people coming into the tool library are quite surprised and ask, hey, what's going on over there?
Mhm.
It looks like there's a full shop over there. And so the tool library provides a nice introduction to people who might
Yep.
be interested to come into the maker.
When you transition from the single fee to the tiered structure, how engaged were your existing members in identifying the kind of the price points and the benefits? And two, can you go in a little bit more detail about how you're planning to adjust the multi-tier system and if there's a plan to engage members in that process and what you think that'll look like?
Yeah, I think yeah, people are fairly conscious of like they definitely think about it when they're selecting their tier. If I'm understanding the question correctly,
Mhm.
like people are fairly price conscious. I think what one thing that is nice for people is that if they get a say the basic tier and they find that they
Mhm.
need more than 3 days of borrowing, we'll deduct what they've already paid from upgrading to one of the other tiers.
Mhm.
So that gives people a fairly non-threatening way to get started. But I do think they choose rather carefully when they're selecting their membership. In terms of transitioning away from the tier system, I think it's really all coming down to communication. As I say, we have started communicating this stuff out through our website and just talking to the members. And I think a lot of people buy the higher tier directly because they want to support more and don't really have that inside view that it actually creates more problems for the tool library than does the more basic tiers. So I think really it's an education effort. We've got a pretty active
Mhm.
mailing list. We have a very active Discord community. And I think that those things are going to be pretty important. We also have events like member appreciation events where we invite everybody in and, share some food
Mhm.
and chat with people. And I think those are going to provide a really good opportunity. So hopefully we've done our work well enough. It won't be a big surprise.
And how many members total do you have?
There's 900 for the tool library, who
Mhm.
are the active members from a pool of about 5,000 who sort of come and go. And then
Mhm.
for the makerspace, there's 160 active monthly members from a pool of about 800 that will come and go as they have
Okay.
projects.
Thank you, Tim.